Hello again from the Token Creek Festival, again in Cambridge, Massachusetts, framed as you can see by the complete Bach edition about which we will not be speaking, but we will be speaking about some beautiful vocal music which has been performed over many seasons at Token Creek, involving the songs of Schubert and Schumann. When Schubert and Schumann, particularly Schubert, began writing what we now call art songs, it was still something of a new idea. It was something which Beethoven and Mozart had tried out somewhat gingerly, not with really a huge investment of their time and energy, something which Schubert found particularly compelling and suitable to his particular talent. And we know that in his rather unusual composing schedule, which involved often the writing of a number of songs in a morning, and then an afternoon spent drinking, carousing, and hanging out with his friends, that this medium became the most congenial, the most suited to his temperament, to his strange combination of great conviviality and a deep sense of solitariness and loneliness, which he carried throughout his entire life, short life. Our program is a traditional sort of song program that is of the kind that used to be given most often by, let's call them big time famous singers, where they would sing songs, sometimes in fact interspersed with quite other kinds of music, but songs and song cycles or excerpts from song cycles. Usually particularly dramatic songs from song cycles. Both composers wrote in both modes. They wrote individual songs. They wrote in a form which really was invented by Beethoven in his single effort of that kind, the An die ferne Geliebte, a form which struck Schubert as being a new thing, a new dramatic form, which he really developed beyond all expectation in pieces like Winterreise and Schöne Müllerin. These pieces became narratives of a kind with a very careful selection of poetry, first by Schubert and by Schumann, which provided a kind of shadow, shall we say, a kind of chronicle, usually more psychological than filled with event, though enough event so that the psychology was made much more clear and telling and emotional. We start the program with 3 isolated songs, that is, familiar Schubert songs, which are often part of such a program. But then we move quickly into the latter part of a piece by Schubert, which is called Schwangesang, swan songs, final songs. It is not really clear whether he meant it to be a cycle, but it can form itself into a cycle. And with subsequent editing has often been performed as such. Our excerpt includes some songs toward the end of what is usually the sequence of performance, poems by Heine, tremendously dramatic, searching, searing songs, which are really characteristic of this final piece of Schubert's. It cuts so close to the bone, it's really a difficult journey, and it is a journey in spite of the fact that Schubert himself didn't leave a full indication of what order he wanted these songs to be performed in. They are a group by dint of them being really his last compositions. They're a group by dint of also him having arrived at a style so economical and forceful that we really can't imagine these songs in other company than each other. We follow that with a rather different group. I was hoping to illustrate different aspects of or possibilities of the form of the cycle discoveries which Schubert and Schumann made about the possibilities of the cycle. We follow that with a group from Schöne, and these come at the end of the cycle. The most hopeless and perhaps most tragic of any song cycle. It is even more down to the last breath piece than Winterreise, its partner song cycle. And the cycle ends with a number of songs which are of a type that Schubert was master. The strophic song, which means songs in which many verses are sung with essentially the same pattern, the same musical pattern. It's really hard to write this kind of song effectively because you have to figure out the music which will be the right music somehow for a number of different verses. And the songs depend a lot on what the piano plays in between each verse. And in these final songs from Schöne, Schubert has discovered the most, I would say, most felicitous relationship between the repeated strain and the repeated piano passage, in which the performer needs somehow to go a little deeper each time into the very simple materials which Schubert has provided. So this selection comes from the very end of the sad saga of this young miller who falls in love with a young woman who is obviously never going to be interested in him. The tragedy of the song being possibly made much greater by the fact that the poor guy never really gets it. We then follow it with a couple more isolated songs, very familiar ones, to bring us back to the sort of recital world, the world from which really all of this originated. Songs which are sung as often as anything in the art song literature, but which need to be sung that often. They are in Frühling and Frühlingsklaue so incredibly touching and exact. And that's the end of the Schubert half of our concert. We move on with a similar format, but with a very different composer. Schumann comes along later to the song cycle. He obviously knows about Schubert's achievements. He adds a number of things to the concept. First of all, he is building his songs more around the piano part. The piano part is almost self-sufficient in Schumann songs, which in Schubert it very seldom is. You can practice your part if you're the pianist for a Schubert song and you feel you are, in a sense, complete, except of course, you don't know exactly what the emotional and sort of a narrative content of the words is going to bring until you really hear the way that the singer illuminates every word. In Widmung, which is this beginning of our Schumann cycle, this is the beginning of a little cycle of its own, but we use it here to lead to 5 songs from his perhaps best known cycle, Dichterliebe. Dichterliebe is on poems of Heinrich Heine, an incredibly hopped up, hyper romantic, bitter, sweet, mostly bitter Jewish poet, incredibly touching poet who really is so much allowing his emotions to be close to the surface. One of the things that is loved about these songs is how much of this Schumann manages to catch. The beginning of Dichterliebe is famous because Schumann here has a new idea about what you might do in a song cycle. Unlike the discrete announcement of each song, which is the way that Schubert generally proceeds, obviously there are sort of inner groupings, but there are pauses. Schumann really enchains the opening songs of Dichterliebe. He makes it into one tonal connected narrative, and of course performers you always understand this, and it makes a kind of swift and almost hurtling injection into the cycle. Even though the pulse of some of the songs is not quick, The momentum goes right through, really, and that momentum really never lets up in Dichterliebe. The sense of it being a composition threaded through is something that Schumann is extremely intent on pursuing here. And one hears in Dichterliebe right away the increased importance of what we call the play out. That is, a song ends and the pianist has quite a lot left to say. What's he saying? Well, he's saying something that might not be even said in words, or he's saying something in the musical materials which have not really been fulfilled and which the pianist has then the duty and the incredible possibility of fulfilling. But the play out is something which Schumann really takes on and makes his own. And it's there again very much in our selections from Körnerlieder, which is a more frenetic, over-the-top kind of expression even than Dichterliebe. Partly the poems, partly I think the state of mind of Schumann in this cycle. The playouts here are mini piano pieces of the greatest intensity, and you carry away from these Körner songs a sense of a unified and extreme expression that shared by the singer and the pianist. We complete this little concert, it's not so little by this time, with two more songs from the same cycle as the Widmung that preceded this half of the concert. And we think a little bit more about this miracle of an invention, that is the art song, which is really different from the popular song, it's different from the street song, it's different from the folk song. It is as close as it can be without being a bow on the string to the kind of music that one would make also for violins and cellos and pianos. It belongs to that world of chamber music, but it also belongs to the world of poetry. The one world it does not belong to is opera. It is not a plotted exchange of idea, development of plot. It is usually a single plotted moment and one person's expression. And I think this is one of the great virtues of the song cycle. It is also quite important to be as familiar with the words as you can when you're listening. If you don't know German, you can find these texts. It will enhance your enjoyment of these pieces and your appreciation for them. The poets are not nearly as good as the composers, but that doesn't make much difference because they become the same thing. That is, the songs are a fusion, and whatever the poetry is absolutely absorbed completely by the writing of these two master song composers. Thank you for, again, tuning in to our concert, and we hope to see you and hear you. We won't see you, but we will know you're there next time.